Yeah, I think we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Substack Live. Our focus of late has been orders of Donald Trump or Russia or whatever. But of course, as always, the litigation prompted by his flurry, it understates it, of arguably unlawful orders goes on. And that means that Adam Klasfeld of All Rise Video keeps working. The last few days have featured an actual trial, not simply a motion to temporary stay, but an actual trial before Judge Charles Breyer. This rose out of the same set of facts that he ruled on before, having to do with the arguably over aggressive response of ICE in Southern California. Governor Gavin Newsom sued in the Northern District of California. So you have the case Newsom versus Trump, which had a 3-day trial with evidence and the like. And Adam, as usual, is all over it. So welcome, Adam. Good to be with you as always. Did you have a fun last 72 hours? Tell us about
Oh,
it.
oh yes. Well, there's always human drama in every trial, and this one was no exception. But one of the most remarkable things, I won't say entertaining, I won't say interesting, was the context of it. Just 3 days before the trial began, Trump and particular the Department of Defense extended their order for the troops to be in LA. Now through November, it's a 90-day extension that makes it go through Election Day. We'll return to that later. And then, of
Did that
course, on
require a new finding?
it intruded into the trial. There was and of course the AG of California, Rob Bonta, alerted the court as soon as that happened, and that it happened mere days before trial. So that there was a memo, and yes, it was brought up right in the lead up to trial. Then, of course, on the day of trial, Trump announces the DC National Guard, and that intruded on the trial. You had multiple witnesses being shown Trump's statements. They said it was the first time, one of them said that it was the first time he had heard it. It was the deputy commander, William Harrington, of the Task Force 51, the task force behind the troops in LA. And one of the main witnesses, the key witness, Major General Scott Sherman, had said that he had heard about it on the news, but they actually played Trump's words in court. And there's a little surprise behind that because what Trump said is, I will use the military for civilian purposes in cities across the United States, which was a really interesting announcement given the fact that throughout the trial, the Department of Justice's position, the Task Force 51's position is, we are not using it for civilian purposes. We're protecting federal buildings. We're protecting federal personnel. God forbid, we abide by the law. That was the theme throughout it. And here's Trump outside the courtroom saying the military will be our law enforcement crime fighting force. Inside the courtroom, they acknowledge they can't do that. So here's Trump, both days before the trial and on the trial, thumbing his nose at the court. And yes, that played out in court. But
Yeah,
I would say,
that's happened. I just want to say again and
right.
again, even back in Minneapolis and Trump 1.0, he talks tough and makes it really sound. I mean, that Monday press conference in D.C., I'm encouraging all federal to go basically bang heads. And then the poor beleaguered lawyers go into court and have to say, under the law, and I'm sure we'll get into this, if a military personnel is just kind of helping out logistically, doing auxiliary support, it's not the same prohibition under the Posse Comitatus Act, which this was under, as actually having the ultimate prohibition that you worry about and that the law prohibits is they're going in and actually being law enforcement officers, arresting and searching and the like. And so, yeah, it's not the first time that the DOJ comes into court and says, "Oops, never mind."
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And it was a remarkable split screen because, as I said, witness after witness came saying, well, we are not doing anything for law enforcement purposes. The
right.
main witness for both the state of California and the federal government was this Major General Scott Sherman. And he went on a remarkable trajectory throughout the trial. When he was called as a witness for the state, he gave a little bit of a peek behind the scenes of the major operation, which is the MacArthur Park operation, made national headlines where we saw photos in every newspaper in America. You
Yeah,
probably have a much better perspective of it than me as a New Yorker.
I know that
But
park though. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and in the backstory behind that was that the commander, the major general behind the entire operation, objected to that operation. He said he didn't
Okay.
want to do it. And as a result, a civilian Trump administration official, Gregory Bovino, who's a Border Patrol sector chief for El Centro, questioned his loyalty. And this is the general, someone who served his country for 33 years.
Yeah.
He's in charge of the whole thing. And for objecting to it, he has his patriotism, his loyalty to the United States questioned. And his trajectory is a really interesting one, Harry, because he says that no one at the Pentagon was calling it a rebellion. He goes ahead and says that there were threat assessments were
But
low,
which
that
matters, right? Because that's what the statute requires.
absolutely. It
Yeah.
was one of the major justifications behind this whole thing. They are supposedly quelling a rebellion and shot down by the major general. Now, that was day one. Day two,
Actually, let me stop you, and if I might.
yeah,
So let's
absolutely.
do the broad strokes first. So 3-day trial, Breyer on the bench, so he'll decide for himself about how many witnesses on each side, how long did it take. Give us the 30,000-foot view, and then let's bore down.
Absolutely. So it was a 3-day trial. The evidentiary phase was the first 2 days of trial. There are three witnesses on day one. You have that William Harrington, who I mentioned, General Sherman, and Ernesto Santa Cruz, who is with the ERO, Enforcement Removal Operations within ICE. And they all delivered testimony. The most compelling and the most significant for short Zoom is General Sherman. Day
Yeah.
two is Sherman only. He's the sole witness for the federal government.
So
And there
wait,
was
so California says we rest, Your Honor, and the federal
correct.
government turns around and we recall General Sherman. That's
Exactly.
there. Okay.
And it wasn't really a surprise. The witness lists were released on the docket before the trial began. We knew it was coming. What I found surprising is that I was expecting, since I had seen General Sherman's testimony on day one, that his testimony on day two would be similar to that. And what a walkback. He goes and says that the rebellion, well, we knew that the president issued a memorandum calling it a rebellion, and everyone at the Pentagon was aware of that. So there's cleanup on that testimony. He cleans up the testimony about MacArthur Park and says suddenly, well, the reason that that was over my head because the threat level was so high, the overall threat level. Now, he had said that the threat level for property was low, so he made some sort of
Yeah.
qualification and an excuse. But one thing that was never addressed is, well, why did a civilian Trump official question your patriotism if this was just a logistical
Yeah.
objection? And then he, of course, by describing the threat level as high, it seemed to be like a walk back on all points. But I think that
And then was Breyer in these first 2 days, and I assume the third day is for closing arguments and such. But was Breyer an active questioner?
He was. And one of the things, and there was a remarkable moment with the general, because the general on day two was describing, because this crux of his argument is that the government did not violate the Posse Comitatus Act because what he called a constitutional exception, that they can supposedly detain people if the detention is in the service of protecting federal buildings, that this is some constitutional exception that he said he was told from up high. And the judge chimed in at that moment
Right.
and said, what is the constitutional exception? I've been on the bench for decades. I have never heard of this. And,
Very
and
smart guy, by the way, Stephen Breyer, Justice Stephen Breyer's brother, and very well respected in San Francisco. A brainy guy for sure. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And so that
yeah.
created a funny exchange.
And
The
well, what did he
general
say? Yeah,
Yeah, the general said he didn't know, where he didn't know where it came from. He said, "I'm not a lawyer." And Judge Breyer said, "Well, that might work in your favor." There was a
yeah,
little laughter in the courtroom
yeah.
after that one, but he basically he established, and it became very clear that he was just informed by the DOD, that the lawyers went through it. It created something that was described to him as a constitutional exception, that things that are normally prohibited.
Before that they did this before, and he's saying they went. Okay,
He said that he received legal instructions. He was pretty vague about how he received it. He didn't
yeah.
say whether it was in a meeting or anything. He just said it went high up to the top of the DOD.
Got it.
So
And I want to
he
make one point here that aligns with everything else they've been doing. Tom Homan, who's the czar here, every time somebody, there's a terrible outrage shown on TV, he gets on and says, "Well, we are allowed to detain briefly, but that's true. But if and only if this is a whole nother lawsuit, you have reasonable suspicion to do it. You just can't start banging heads, and moreover." If that's the limit of their authority, if you detain, is a brief questioning, and there's all this evidence of people, pulling people out of cars and going much farther. So even if they're relying on that, they have done a poor job of educating their folks in the field of what it really means to have specific suspicion and how limited the intrusion it justifies.
Absolutely. And so down the line, you had General Sherman saying, well, this wasn't a security perimeter, where this was protection. This was protection of federal forces,
Yeah,
protection of federal buildings. We detained this person because he was approaching federal property. You remember the big story about a veteran who's trying to go to the VA. He had
right.
to cross past yellow tape. The backstory behind that, according to General Sherman, is, well, civilian law enforcement wasn't there at the moment. It was lunch break, and since it was a federal building, no Posse Comitatus Act violation. And
Because
so,
I see, and just to recall, he puts it in reverse, and they just crash the window, grab him, and he's a U.S. citizen, and he disappears for 3 days. Nobody knows sort of where he is. He's just trying to get out of there. But okay, so that's their claim, and I guess well. Let's go to the third day, or what. So it sounds like this articulation was by a non-lawyer, doesn't really know. It's relevant because that's what the lawyers told him. But now what is set up as the issue for decision before Judge Breyer? The U.S. makes what claim, the California makes what claim, and what do you anticipate, in the opinion? Oh, by the way, if you know when it might issue, let us know that too. But
right.
that first part that says the issue here is blank, as in a lawyerly way, how would you say what's been set up for the court?
Right. Well, Judge Breyer didn't really give a timeline for the
Yeah,
opinion. But one thing that I'll say, I watched the oral arguments before he declared the entire order illegal.
yeah,
Uh, if anything, he was not subtle in that one before he issued
yeah,
that order. Everyone knew which way the wind was going to blow.
yeah.
I would say during oral arguments on the third day and final day of trial, he made very clear how troubled he was by the government's legal arguments, because the government's legal arguments break down to this. The Posse Comitatus Act is a criminal statute. It doesn't have a civilian application. So Judge Breyer pressed them on that, said, well, if it has no civilian application, so it's a criminal application, you can prosecute him. But wait, you can't do that because of Trump versus the United States. So the end result is too bad, so sad, the case is over. He's basically saying, and he said it quite explicitly, under the government's theory, the Posse Comitatus Act is a nullity. And if you look at the history of the statute was created after the Civil War by southern states that didn't want the military in the streets, and for a very sordid reason, because they did not want enforcement of the civil rights of enslaved people.
That's right.
But if you look at the history of the law, it wasn't that, yes, you can have this military on streets doing civilian law enforcement to execute the laws of the United States. No, it was to stop the military from executing the laws of the United States. And it was very clear throughout oral arguments where Judge Breyer at one point said he was troubled by the government